Boomers, it's time to cash out and live the good life. Let me show you what I mean by that. But before we get into all that, please like, comment, subscribe, share. It really helps grow the channel on both real estate knowledge, economics knowledge. And on this one, I'm going to break down and show with you a little bit of a history lesson, some graphs and charts that shows you where boomers own 60% of the wealth in the US through both their personal real estate and also their businesses, and some of the trends and ongoing developments over time that we're seeing from both the past and going forward on everything from just a socio-economic standpoint, and then how that personally affects real estate, and then getting a little bit into business equity on everything. But that's what we're going to go over today. I'm going to go ahead and just start screen sharing what we have going on here, so we can both look at the visuals together, and I can break down and help you make sense of all this, give you some of my observations and insights and strategies, and then from there you can kind of decide what you want to do with it from there. So this graph gives you a very good representation of wealth by generation, and this comes from this Federal Reserve to Business Insider picture article. And I can't remember when and where I saw this, but it was very enlightening to see this data, to see where things are at, and kind of understand these trends and how people work and demographics and what's going on from the data of everything. So if you look at the wealth by generation, current modern day age, you can see where millennials are at. You know, that's where I fall into everything. Then you can see where Generation X is at. And then you can see where the boomers own 60%, almost 60% of all the wealth in the US. And the silent generation is now down to 25%, because honestly, the truth is a lot of them aren't here anymore. And so as you see generational wealth pass on, and what you've been hearing over the next like 10 to 20 years is going to be one of the largest wealth transfers in the history of our nation, is because what we're going to see here is, as these boomers that are anywhere from 60 to 77 in age are needing and wanting to cash out of both their personal house, their personal real estate, and then also their business real estate and their business equity. Those two things is primarily where they're holding the vast majority of their wealth, and where it's got to go somewhere. Something's going to happen to it. Either they're going to pass it on to those to inherit it. It's going to get sold. You're going to have new business acquisitions, new real estate acquisitions, and it's these natural, normal next phases of life that a good amount of the boomers are sitting on the wealth and what's going on there. And you know, it's kind of just that situation where it's like they need to be helped through that transition of the next phase of their life and processing what's going on with that. So to understand why this is, how it works, all that, we got to go back in time a little bit and look at wealth over the years. You know, back in 1990, the silent generation owned 80% of the wealth. That's how drastically different it was when you look at from a money and power standpoint, how much more the silent generation had back in the 90s. And if you think about like the 90s and what it was like, internet wasn't really around back then. It was very industrial based, corporate based, manufacturing based, mechanical based. The digital world wasn't quite there like it is now on everything to have that much of an impact on it. And so you had the silent generation holding 80% of the wealth, and the boomers in 1990 had about 20% of the wealth. And obviously Gen X and millennials were all kids back then. So part of this is just the natural, normal evolution of demographics, and as time goes on, where wealth gets transferred, because it's got to go somewhere with all this. You know, it can't be created nor destroyed. It just transfers and passes on everything. Where a lot of this stuff is physics and energy and science, and it's understandable. But that helps you look at the 90s. But then if you look at like 2000, this is right about the time when like technology, the dot-com bust came around. Things were going on where things started to really shift and change. And honestly, what happens is just that people do die. People do pass on everything. And I think that's that is one of the primary reasons of why the silent generation's wealth is going down, because they're just not around anymore. You know, they passed on, they passed away, and that's the natural order and progression of humans and demographics just over time, is that people are gonna come and go with that. And so as they come and go, so does their wealth with everything. And so naturally, a good amount of that has been started to pass on to the next generation, which is boomers. And why you're seeing a primary amount of boomers have the majority of the wealth in the US is because of that natural progression from the silent generation to the boomers generation. And again, all this is on percentages. So it's not necessarily whether boomers are growing their wealth or not. It's just where's the percentage of what's available and who is it allocated to on everything. So it's pretty drastic when you look at silent generation at 80% of the wealth in the 90s. And that was a wildly skewed like perspective on percentage wise when you look like how much of the piece of the pie they accumulated back then. And so in the 2000, you can start to see where boomers were starting to get more of the wealth at 40%. Gen X was kind of starting to get more of it too. They're sub 10, and obviously millennials just weren't old enough. They were still kids back then on everything. But as you start to see time goes on, more and more boomers are accumulating more wealth, but not quite at the lopsided factor like the silent generation was before. You're starting to see, Gen X, which is boomers' kids, start to get more of the wealth, and then millennials really own squat for wealth when it comes to our generation. And I'm technically a millennial. I'm 35. Let's look up the age range for millennials to give you an idea of who these people are and why they're so financially strapped, and houses are so affordable and they can't buy houses and businesses and all these things because of look at the wealth gap on everything. It's pretty understandable. So millennials, somebody born from the 1980s to the 1990s. So, I mean, that's somebody that's going to be like 43 at the top from 1980 to 1990s, anywhere to like 23. So like 23 to 44-year-olds is millennials. And you can see how little of the wealth that they own from cash, assets, cash flow, that kind of thing. When you study economics and history, you just kind of make sense of all these things, and it paints a clear picture of it all, that like it's all very understandable why millennials can't buy houses, why boomers have a good amount of the wealth and the cash and things that are there, and what they choose and decide to do with it. But what we're starting to see, and what we're going to continue to see, I'm not a magic ball, or I don't know, I'm not a genie, I don't have a magic ball, but what I'm seeing over the next 10 to 20 years is these boomers that are 60 to 77 years old. There's two things are going to happen. And I know this sounds kind of blunt and morbid and cruel, but they're either going to pass away, and their inheritance, their wealth, all their success has to go somewhere, be passed on to either their kids, or if they don't like their kids or don't want to give it to their kids, like somebody's got to pass it on. It's got to go somewhere. Something's going to happen with that wealth. It's not like it's not going to go anywhere. Something's going to happen to it. So from there, it's just a matter of who's it going to, what's it going to, and that kind of thing. A good amount of it more than likely will be passed on to the next generation of Gen X with everything, to where Gen X will come into this. And then you look at millennials and how much wealth they don't own in the country, and things go on with that. But this is where the opportunity lies, whether you're Gen X, whether you're millennials, what have you. There's going to be a great amount of wealth transfer and what I would call equity liquidation from people's personal homes. The personal real estate, there's a lot more boomers that own homes that they've owned free and clear for a long time, 20, 30, 40 years. They've lived in that house forever, and either the kids are going to inherit it, they're going to pass away, it's going to go to an estate, or they're going to sell it off ahead of time and hopefully enjoy those golden years, that 60 to 80 to 90, hopefully 100 that they live for the next rest of their life. And a lot of it is they just kind of need help moving on to that next transition, that next phase of their life that's appropriate and normal. Because I know a good amount of them can't see themselves living outside of the home they're in, or not working anymore. And they've just become so, I don't want to say trapped in that identity, but kind of just so stuck in that identity and phase of life. It's, a change process that they're going to need help to go through in order to see the next phase of their life, the next identity, and move away from what's familiar, which is usually their personal house, even though it's outdated, even though it doesn't work for them, it's too big, XYZ, whatever reason. They need some personal attention and care from a human, not a robot, not a click button website, to help them make that transition to the next phase of their life in order to move on, cash out, do your thing. So there's going to be a lot more houses to sell that people have, because that's where a majority of people keep their wealth in the US. But then there's going to be some of these other business owners too that I was wanting to get into, that also are looking to sell their businesses and want their businesses to be passed on to either like their kids, or go to sell it through a business broker, or to be passed on to like an owner who understands is going to take care of it and be a good steward of that business over the next 10, 20, 30 years to keep the jobs there, to keep the employees in place, to keep the brand, the reputation, the legacy going. But, they're getting to be 60 and 70. They can't really run businesses that well anymore. They don't want to run businesses that well anymore. And it's kind of just the normal, appropriate next step to be passing it on to the next generation, whether that be Gen X, whether that be millennials. It's kind of where we're seeing boomers have a large majority of their wealth from in their 60 to 75 years old. And that wealth and that cash and all of this, everything they built and passed on to us needs to be handled and transitioned appropriately and responsibly so that we don't screw it up. It doesn't get tarnished. Like, we continue the good things that are going on with personal real estate and business equity with all these things. So as you're seeing the demographics and the economics of it all, the history of it, but then also you kind of start to tell and paint a picture of what's going to happen in the future. Again, I'm no genie with the magic ball, but you can see where the opportunity is at and where America does have a good amount of cash, equity, untapped wealth. And we're going to see this transfer over the next 10 to 20 years where the boomer generation starts to either pass away or transferred on all that. So therein lies the opportunity for a lot of things. And at the end of the day, regardless of interest rates, the economy, everything else, that's the silver lining to this whole thing, is how much wealth and equity we have in our personal houses and also businesses that needs to be transacted, that needs to flow, that needs to happen, that can be the solution to all these problems we're having. If we could just get, the boomers to move on from their personal homes, their personal real estate, and also their business equity. And it will happen over the next 10 to 20 years, either through natural occurrences or through voluntary transitions and processes of everything. Because the truth is, at the end of the day, houses are still buying and selling. 10,000 homes sell every day. You divide that by 24 to get 452 sell per hour. 452 divided by 60, that's 8 each minute. And you kind of got to look at why humans are buying and selling real estate. A lot of it has to do with this demographic change and wealth transfer of just the natural order of people with everything. Because what we're seeing right now is about 36% of homes in the US are paid off free and clear. Another 33% have more than 50% equity on everything. So we have a ton of equity and cash and ability to make moves and make things happen. It's just where and how and what is that going to transact and look like. And at the end of the day, when you really look at why people buy and sell and move on everything, it's because of life events. Births is one of them. People reaching 65, which is the boomers, like what I was just discussing. Also deaths, like those two right there, is a lot of just the reality of what you're seeing that's going to happen. To where it's like this market, this exchange, this transfer is going to happen, whether you take advantage or you get to participate or not, it's going to go somewhere. And really the question just becomes, how do I go get a peace of mind to continue there for yourself, for your family, for your friends, the business, the house, the community you live in, so that we can make the world a better place and continue on with progress. And then obviously there's marriage and divorce that drive that too. Those don't quite apply as much for boomers, as much as obviously reaching 65, wanting to retire and move on to the golden years, the next phase of your life. Same thing with deaths that come with all that. So that's probably the biggest one that goes into it all. And then if you are a boomer that's looking to cash out, here's some different local stats I want to throw at you just so you can kind of strategically plan this. Like one of my sellers that's selling here in the spring, and he's 73. He's been working for the last 30 years, owns about a $350,000 house, and he owns it free and clear. He's just ready to cash out. It's too big a house to manage anymore, too much for him to take on. Good house, good neighborhood, good location. It's just too much for him and his wife to take care of. And it's just them living in a 2,800 square foot house. And it's a couple with a 5-bed, 3-bath house. And they've lived there for a long time, but they just don't need that big house anymore. It just doesn't make sense. Don't need it, need to move on, go travel, live your life, sell your house, maybe rent for a year. It's not the end of the world. Maybe then buy something smaller. That whole transition process is where we're seeing a good amount of the boomer generation making moves, making transfers, things happening, making way for the next generation of Gen X and millennials to get their personal home, their personal real estate. And honestly, it's what I believe is not just the builders building enough houses. It's this dynamic that is stalling and kind of clogging up our U.S. real estate market, is that we need to help boomers through the next phase of their life, through that personal care and transition and phase, and kind of all the processes and discussions and conversations that go around taking that next step in life, because it can be scary for them because it's unfamiliar and they're not sure if they want to go there next. and they're not sure what life looks like, once they retire, once they sell their house, once they move on. And that can be a very troublesome thing for them to process. And they operate pretty old school, if you will, on a personal level, in person, over the phone, all these human based old school things that aren't super tech heavy. And the tech world kind of scares them. And it's your job to really be there for them, to help them through that whole transition. And you can call this a real estate thing, but really it's a business wide thing. And it's just helping the older generation and taking care of the older generation to proceed on to that next phase of life, that next transition. So everyone else after them can also keep going on it all. So it's kind of like they're not holding up the line a little bit. I love them. God bless them. Like, they're great people, but you just have to understand, especially with our modern digital world and technology, how disconnected we've become from connecting with humans and helping humans through their situation on a personal level. And I think there's still value and merit to that, when you meet with people that own the homes and own the businesses, and you help them through to build that personal connection, personal relationship, to take them through the process of coming on this next phase of life. So everyone thereafter them can also benefit as well on everything. So there's obviously financial personal benefits, but there's also intangible benefits that helping your economy and your community move forward and progress through the next phase of life for everyone, especially as people having marriages and births, so they can get the houses they need, they can move in, they can move on, they can build their life. And it's kind of their turn to do all those same things that boomer generation helped to do all this. So I don't want this to come across at all like blamey or negative or consequential, but you can look at the data, look at the facts of what needs to happen. And we need that wealth to transfer, and it's going to transfer over the next 10 to 15 years, whether through a solid strategic plan or through the natural process of people dying and passing away and their wealth going somewhere on all that. So one of those two ways is how it's going to transfer. Just no matter how we shape that, what that looks like, and how that comes apart, I think there's a case to be made for helping people through that situation to cash out. So if you're a boomer that's wanting to explore more of selling your personal real estate or your business, I have solutions for both. To tap out on your equity, time to cash out, live the good life, go do all that fun stuff. But this kind of helps you see what's going on with everything. This gives you an idea of our local market. Springtime's really the best time to sell your personal real estate as far as the most activity, especially the higher price points. You can see, like, over the winter markets, lower price points sell in the spring and summer, higher price points sell on everything. So that's kind of give you the best strategy for our local Wichita market on anything. But I think you kind of get the point. Case has been made on boomers. It's time to cash out. Let's go ahead and live the good life, move on to that next fun transition in your life, the next phase from either your personal house, your business, what have you. Go ahead and shoot me a message. Let's reach out and discuss. And hopefully this helps you kind of where you're at, whichever phase of life, transition in life you're in. And we'll hopefully talk with you soon. See ya.